Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Beau Lotto wants to change the way we see things and unlock innovation. Let's find out how. Beau, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Now, Beau, first of all, I know that you run a mysterious lab called the Lab of Misfits, and I love that title. You have to tell us a little more about it.
Well, it's actually genuinely a lab, and it is in fact made up of misfits. So, what is it's a lab is, and in some sense, you could argue that every lab is, because it's people who don't quite fit anywhere in particular. And the reason is because they're really driven by questions rather than answers. And so if you're open to asking questions, well, you're open to ask questions pretty much on about anything.
So now, just like someone might be an associate lawyer or a senior lawyer, is this a senior misfit, an associate misfit? And how does your staff like being titled that way?
It seems to resonate pretty well. And the part of what we do is we actually do bring people together from a diverse group of backgrounds. And there are a number of reasons for doing that, which we can get into, which actually does have a lot to do with success. In fact, if you give me two different types of groups, one group is, say, a lower average IQ from a more diverse background, and another one was a higher average IQ from a more similar background, I actually want the first group. And it has everything to do with the complexity of the search space that diverse group has. It also enables people to become better understanders of themselves, because sometimes the best person to reveal your own assumptions to you is not you, it's someone else.
And, of course, I'm having a little fun with you because I love that title, The Lab of Misfits, and I don't know if you market your T-shirts and your hats, etc., or even if you have them, but I think that would be really cool because it would generate, someone sees that and they have to ask you, what do you do? So that's like what do they call it, the elevator pitch, just in 3 words, Lab of Misfits. If I saw that and you were in an elevator, I'd have to talk to you.
Well, we do want to sort of celebrate misfits culture, because really, I'd argue that pretty much everyone's a misfit. To know someone is really not to know how they're average. To know someone is to know how they deviate from average.
And, of course,
the ways in which they are misfit.
And that's the title of your book, I guess, Deviate, right?
Yeah, which is really, that's one of the reasons for entitling the book Deviate, is for people to, in some sense, to have science be a way of giving permission to step into uncertainty, to question the things that you think to find who you are, right? To deviate from where you are, but also understand to deviate is actually to find out who you are.
Well, I find it very interesting, and going through your book, it's almost like and you're a neuroscientist, a scientist's view of the Twilight Zone. And you start out and you say something like, most of life happens without us there. Can you tell us what that means? I mean, I always thought I was there when my life was happening, but so how is it happening without me there?
Well, that is true, of course. What I mean by that is that there's sort of a longer context to this. So the argument is that when I mean most of your life happening without you there, it's because our brain comes into the world with all kinds of assumptions and biases that come from a history. And what has shaped our brain is not just your individual history, but also the history of your culture as well as your ancestors in terms of evolution. And so we come into the world with all kinds of biases and assumptions. In fact, the functional structure of your brain is literally a physical manifestation of your species, of your culture, interaction with the world. And that's what your brain represents. So when you look out into the world, you're looking out into the world with all these biases and assumptions that you have inherited. You're not necessarily aware of this. In fact, we're rarely aware of why we do what we do. But this history is nonetheless shaping us, and it's constraining us all the time.
Now, Beau, you as an example of this, I think you mentioned a famous experiment about a dress. And to let our radio audience know a little bit, if I remember correctly, there was a picture of the dress on the internet, and someone asked, is it black and white stripes or white and black, something like that? Am I correct?
Yeah, so those particular colors aren't quite right, but the point is that there was this image. It was a photograph of a dress. And one person who took photographs of the dress saw certain colors. For instance, whether it was yellow and black dress, for instance. But when they asked the person, do you like this yellow and black dress, they're saying, what are you talking about? It's not a yellow and black dress, it's a blue and black dress. Well, then there was this tremendous confusion, of course, because they're looking at the exact same image, but they couldn't agree on the colors that they were seeing. And that consequence of actually taking something, exactly the same image, and the fact that people can see different colors really seemed to grab people's attention. In fact, in some sense, it made people feel very secure. Made people feel very insecure. And it became quite a social phenomenon where this dress was shared everywhere. And what I loved about it was that we can appreciate that someone might have a different word for something because they speak French and I speak English. But the idea that we could actually see the world in different colors, I think really sort of shook people's foundation of what is it that they see when they open their eyes in the first place then.
And this experiment, if I remember from the book, really included a lot of what we can call us. It wasn't just scientists because it was on the internet and people voted. Am I correct? They each wrote back in, I see a blue and white or I see a black and white or whatever they saw. And at the end of it, there were many people voting, and I think it came out 60-40 or something like that.
That's right. And the point is that actually the dress isn't colored at all because the perception of color doesn't actually exist in the world. So, of course, there's light, there's electromagnetic radiation, and there's light energy that falls onto our retina. But the light itself is not colored. Red is not a function of the world. Green is not a function of the world. If a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? The answer is no. The tree exists. Energy is created when it falls, but that energy, that vibration in the air is not sound. Sound is a construct of our brain. Redness or blueness or yellowness is a construct of our brain. We take that perception and we project it out into the world. So not only were people having debates about the perceptions of the world, in fact, they're having debates about the perceptions that are inside their head.
Now, because for years we've all heard that question, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? And now we have the answer. So already your lab...
That creates energy.
Your lab of misfits has helped us. But we'd like to let our audience know, in case they missed the first part of the show, that our guest today is Beau, spelled B-E-A-U, Lotto, L-O-T-T-O. His book is entitled, with one word, Deviate, D-E-V-I-A-T-E. And Beau, can you tell us where we can get the book? And is there a website we should know about?
Yeah, so you can get the book at pretty much all your regular bookstores, as well as independent stores. And you can learn about the book, on my lab's website, for one, which is thelabofmisfits.com. And we have a whole section devoted to the book itself.
And I think it's got to be a lot of fun for our audience. I just love that title, Lab of Misfits. And so many of the things that you talk about in the book are so interesting and challenge us. And so I'm going to start with one of them, because you kind of like uncertainty. Now, I like to know my cereal is there in the morning and the fruit I put on it is there, and I'm that certain person. You know, I have my shoelaces lined up, etc. But you like uncertainty and say that's really good for us. Am I correct?
Yes and no, actually. I would say that I hate uncertainty, and I'm no different from anyone else. In fact, the brain evolved to a certain extent in nearly every context to hate uncertainty. And the reason is because to not know was to die. Dying is easy. Staying alive is hard. There are lots of ways of dying. And the better able you were to predict what was going to happen next, the more likely you were to survive. So to not know was really an existential problem. You were selected out if you didn't know. And our brains evolved to take what is meaningless information that our retina and our eardrums detect and to make meaning out of that. So we take the meaningless and we make meaning. We take the useless data and it becomes useful, right? So to be in a situation of uncertainty, which is the fundamental problem that our brains evolved to solve, is a real problem because it usually meant death. So most of our behaviors are actually an attempt to decrease uncertainty, to increase certainty. So that is a fundamental challenge, because the irony is that the only place you can go if you're ever to see differently is to step into uncertainty, the very place that our brains evolved to solve. In fact, the stress from uncertainty is one of the biggest causes of our sense of unwellness in our culture. When you feel chronic stress from uncertainty, your brain cells start dying, your brain cells become less plastic, you can become a more extreme version of yourself, and often it results in anger, which pushes you towards moral judgmentalism, a complete sense of certainty, right? And yet, going into uncertainty is where we have to go if ever we're going to see differently. So a fundamental question is, how do we get there?
And that's why I think what you do is so interesting, because most of us would say, I want to talk to that person who can tell me that the Yankees are going to win tomorrow, or the basketball team at the local college is going to win the next 5 games. Something with certainty, or I'll be a starter on the team, or I'll graduate at the top of my class. And you actually say that not knowing and admitting it is actually celebrated. Did I get that statement correct?
Yeah, I'd argue it's actually the route to success.
There we go. And that's what we want here.
And in fact, to a large extent, I start off the book by saying my aim is that I want you to know less at the end than you think you know now, right? Which is maybe a bit unusual book, because what I want people to do is to step into uncertainty and to doubt. But not doubt with fear, doubt with courage. Because nothing interesting begins with knowing, it begins with not knowing. The catch isn't a good question, it's not in the right answer. Because you could have a tremendously efficient system that chucks out a really good answer, but if it's not a good question, who really cares?
That's fascinating. Please continue, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the only way that you can ask good questions is if you celebrate doubt, right? And in fact, the best leaders are the leaders that create an environment where doubt with courage is a good thing, where it celebrates diversity, it celebrates asking questions, and it creates an environment of trust, because you can't step into uncertainty outside that context of trust. So I'm not suggesting that everyone run out and be uncertain, because if a bus is coming at you, you want to say, I wonder if there's a different way I can see this. You want to get out of the way as fast as possible, and you want to be certain about that. But the problem is we often live our lives, too often, in fact, as if everything's a bus. And wisdom is knowing when to be in one space or another. So it's not being at the edge of chaos, it's being on the edge of chaos on average. And great leaders are great leaders because it's how they lead others into uncertainty. Right? And that could just be leaders of an organization, but it could also be leaders of a relationship, leaders of a family, of a romantic relationship, or even a leader of yourself. And of course, who is leaders is often shifting back and forth.
Now, that's so interesting. Now, if we're doing this more, does that actually change the physical structure of our brain?
Yes. So any experience, for the most part, will change the functional structure of your brain. Your brain is basically an empirical system, and it learns by interaction, and it learns by trial and error. So it's not so much learning through passivity, passive experience, by just receiving data. It learns by physically interacting and creating the meaning of that data. And it's that meaning that we see.
And I guess I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So we have to, in other words, get a meaning out of something that we see or we think we see. A bus is coming up. We have to interpret what that means. Is that the idea?
That's right. So the data that your brain receives, so if we back up a little bit, your brain has no physical access to the world. Right? It can't see anything directly. And what it has access to is the data that the world generates, the electrical chemical energy that the world generates. But that electrical chemical energy has no meaning. Right? It doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't come with instructions. What's more, it conflates multiple things about the world. For instance, if your listeners hold up their finger in front of their face and they line up their finger with something large and at a distance so that they're at the same size, well, the fact is they aren't the same size. But as far as your eye is concerned, they are. So that's the data that your brain's getting. They're the same size, but your brain doesn't see it that way because in its history of experience, it's learned that the behavioral significance of it is that they are different.
I think
it constructs a meaning based on that data, grounded in its history.